Thank you so much for joining our 60th Knowledge Series session. Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy and delighted to have you all with us. It's so amazing to have been doing this Knowledge Series sessions for the past almost 2 years. And we are reaching to a very big milestone of 60 Knowledge Series sessions. So this is an amazing, amazing journey. And I want to, first of all, thank you for joining and participating and being with us. Many of you have been with us for all the 60 sessions, us from all over the world. So this is really amazing. We are so lucky to have a great community like you among us. And we're so happy to be with you. Today we have two special guest speakers, which I'm really delighted and honored to have them. And definitely they are exceptional AML experts, that we have all the way from the US and all the way from the UK. They came to be with us today. And it's a real pleasure to bring them back. I'm sure that many of you recognize them. They have been with us and they have joined our previous Knowledge Series session. But because we love them so much, we need to bring them back and always have them. We are a fan, so we cannot go and celebrate the 60th session without them. And to celebrate the 60th session, I just want to tell you that stay till the end of the session. We're gonna have a draw on the names, and we're gonna pick 6 names or 6 people who have joined this session, and we're gonna give a prize, which I'm gonna say at the end. So feel free, stay tuned, and let's go to start this amazing session. Welcome, Ross. Welcome, Dev. It's a real pleasure again to have you both with us. I am so delighted, and it's a pleasure really to have you both on the 60th Knowledge Series session, not to just celebrate, but also have an amazing AML experts with us. Ross, thank you so much for being with us. Tell us and give us more information about your experience, your background. I know that many of the people knows you, but I just want to make sure that they hear from you. They hear who you are and what do you do.
Sure. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm delighted to be here with you once again. Amazing job with TCAE and these sessions. It seems like they're every week, but they probably aren't. And Dev, of course, I've known for years. I follow his website, The Laundry. He's in his own laundry. So that machine you see behind him is actually a washing machine. If you were to look inside it, you would see British pounds sterling, and euros, and dollars. Also delighted that we have an audience from all over the world. I've seen Lebanon, Estonia, the US, India, really Malaysia. Great session. Great audience. Well, my view of crypto is not from inside as an exchange, but from my experience with MSBs, money services businesses, my experience with the cryptocurrency sphere, the crypto sphere. I was interviewed just yesterday for an expert witness engagement involving a cryptocurrency exchange that allowed a fraud to continue. So these kinds of things are best viewed from the outside, these types of deficiencies. Dev, why don't you talk about your experience as well?
Yeah, a little bit about my background. About 3.5, 4 years ago, set up my own consultancy specializing particularly in anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism. Having spent about 10 years around about 10 years in the industry and working for a number of financial institutions, I thought it was probably best that I shared my knowledge and expertise a bit wider than just one firm that I was at. So I took all of that experience, all of that knowledge, and then set myself up. And now I just consult to all sorts of different organizations and financial institutions. Just a little bit, I wanted to explain a little bit about this topic and cryptocurrency. So I don't work in a cryptocurrency firm or organization. but I was investigating cryptocurrency activity crossing over into financial institutions before Bitcoin was a household name. What year was it? Probably about 2013, I think it was, around that time. It wasn't as popular as it is now. And I was actually investigating a metaverse, slightly different from cryptocurrencies, before I think it was even called a metaverse. So that was around 2006. So I was deep in that field as well. So although I don't work in organizations like this, I've got expertise in investigating activity related to it, and equally assessing crypto exchanges and crypto firms that have approached financial institutions for banking services. So, assessing their any risks and things like that from that perspective as well. Yeah, a little bit more about me. So yeah, I've got the laundrynews.com, a financial crime news aggregator. It's got everything in there that you need to read daily on AML News. Published a number of articles as well, and often quoted in a number of media outlets, both specialist and just general known outlets such as Forbes, Miami Herald, things like that as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great. Thanks, Dev. So, of course, we have to talk about the pandemic, which is why we're not here in person. And yes, these really are my grandchildren. I do believe in wearing masks, but you do have to wear them correctly. So, the agenda today, we're going to talk about registration and licensing very briefly, just to lay the background to how exchanges are regulated. Then we're going to look at three really interesting companies: Binance, Bitmex, and Tether. Not clear that Tether is an exchange, but it's just so interesting. I felt we needed to include it, and it's a fascinating case study. Then we talk about some of the issues raised by those three case studies: geography, red flags, and stable coins. And of course, our conclusion, I can tell you right now, do be careful. Should you be careful with regulated traditional financial institutions? Of course, but they are regulated and they are traditional. And unless they're absolutely new, they have a track record. In the exchange, the crypto exchange sphere, they're mostly fairly new. So we'll start with US registration very briefly. The US calls them exchangers, not exchange as. They're regulated like money transmitters. As such, excuse me, they're required to register with FinCEN and licensed in every state in the US in which they do business. It's an automatic felony. Don't have to show intent. And a felony in the US is a serious crime for not registering with FinCEN or not being licensed. So because they're considered an MSB, they have to have an AML program with 4 pillars. The 4 pillars are an American expression, but they're also found in the FATF recommendations: written policies and procedures based on a written risk assessment. And again, written policies and procedures. It doesn't count if it's an oral tradition. Designating compliance officer training and periodic independent AML review. Not clear, they're not required to conduct customer due diligence. That's a term of art. They are required to identify customers in a general way on a risk basis, to file suspicious activity reports, and again, to register with states that they plan to do business in, with New York State being the toughest. So tough, it's been criticized. But if you're working with an exchange that is registered in New York State, that would give me some comfort. So we turn to the UK. Dev.
So in the UK, the regulator over here is the Financial Conduct Authority. Since January 10th of January, 2020, they were supposed to start registering themselves. But as we know, the pandemic started shortly after that. So what they've essentially said is you need to get yourself regulated. You need to get yourself registered. And then they go through an assessment process. But they've given a small extension for those that had registered just before January the 10th, 2020, immediately before, they say. So that's extended to, what was it, March this year, end of March this year. But one thing that I noted, and I didn't actually know this until I dug into it, so I've put it in here, is that it says that many of them would not be covered under a financial compensation scheme. So people looking to invest need to be a little bit careful with that. And what the FCA have done, which is quite helpful, is they've provided a list of regulated firms, registered firms, sorry. But they've also maintained another list which has some that are not registered yet. This is quite helpful, not only for people doing due diligence, but also for customers as well. If they want to get involved in that kind of activity, then at least they know who they're dealing with, and just to be a little bit careful if they want to, well, they shouldn't really mess around with unregistered firms. So yeah, they've tried to provide quite a little bit of help, and they're focusing on the customer protection side quite a bit at the moment. There seems to be a lot of initiative around that separate topic, but there is focus on there in the UK as well.
So it's a lot of information in a short time. This is my grandson Charlie's first solid food. He got some of it in his mouth. And then we have 3 case studies. I'm calling them case studies. They're real firms. They're still around. We are not suggesting that they are in some way doing illegal things. However, all 3 have been criticized heavily in the press, criticized heavily by regulators, and we're drawing on those criticisms for the information we're presenting today. This is not based on our own independent investigation, but on media that's very, very evident. So Binance, it bills itself as the world's largest exchange, extraordinarily quick, rapid growth, extraordinary. And when you see rapid growth in a financial institution, you always have to wonder, and this is true for banks, this is true for any financial institution, you have to wonder, how is that possible? So they start out in the People's Republic of China, and they are established in Shanghai, one of the great business centers of China. And then the Chinese decide to crack down on cryptocurrency, so they relocate to Tokyo, but it's not clear where their home regulator will be. Certainly not China, but is it Japan or is it somewhere else? There's no headquarters that's disclosed currently. There are employees all over the world. That doesn't mean that the headquarters is located where the employees are. And then Japan has warned people, according to the news sources, that Binance is offering services without being registered in Japan. Then they announced that Malta would be their new home. Then they decided that Malta would not be a good place, so they left because the Maltese established a regulatory exchange that was quite, well, let's say rigorous. It was the normal EU approach, which is serious regulation. Then they tried to get a controlling stake in a bank in Liechtenstein, were rejected. Then the Turks imposed a fine. The British regulators said that they were not capable of being effectively supervised. There's a great article in the Wall Street Journal about how they became the biggest and the best. And we have some of the sources here. So lots of criticism, lots of growth, lots of statements by Mr. Zhao about he's going to be compliant, he's going to announce a headquarters. Haven't seen a headquarters announced. Compliance, if you're going to be compliant, my advice to any client would be, don't talk about it, just do it. Bitmex, Dev.
Yep. Okay, this is an interesting one again. Starting off 2014, Arthur Hayes and Ben Dello, they started off, well, it was Arthur Hayes initially who had the idea to set up an exchange after the Met Gox hack. He managed to get his money out. It's not in this text here, but this is just what I know. So he managed to get his money out and then decided, oh, there's got to be a better way of putting money somewhere. So he obviously decided to buy more Bitcoin, and then took it upon himself to set one up. So he got in touch with Ben, and together they started to look into it of how to go about setting one up. And then they got somebody called Samuel Reed involved as well. And just the full name of it is called Bitcoin Mercantile Exchange. Now, Ross mentioned the location and the ownership kind of all over the place. Not ownership, sorry, the location in different countries. Similar but not quite the same. With Bitmex, their ultimate holding company is HDR Global Trading Limited. They've got a series of other companies under it as well, collectively known as Bitmex, but they're registered in the Seychelles. The question I normally ask when I'm assessing risk of not just crypto exchanges, but other firms as well, is why are you located there? Why have you chosen that country instead of other countries? Where are you based? What's your nexus to that country? So that's always something that stands out with crypto exchanges and everywhere. Yeah.
Dev, let me add to that. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Are you choosing a particularly weakly regulated country? Are you choosing an offshore financial center like Malta or the Seychelles that are known for weak regulation? And why there? Why not somewhere else? Thanks, Dev. Yes.
Yeah. And that question has helped me in the financial investigation space, where I've uncovered all sorts of other things, not related to this case, but in other cases as well. So it's a helpful question to ask, the why. Now, this Bitmex, they offer essentially a lot of derivative trading, and they came out with this perpetual futures product as well. When they said they were the first to do it. And it was around 2017 that they started to offer 100 times leverage, and that caught the attention of people looking at this kind of stuff, particularly this chap called Nouriel Rabauni, who's a critic, they said, of cryptocurrencies, and he called this out. And in a way, there was a Bloomberg article where he said, oh, they're not following money laundering, or they're trying to skirt money laundering requirements. 2 days later, probably a coincidence, I don't think that was the driver for it, but 2 days later, the CFTC, again, Bloomberg again said that CFTC are investigating Bitmex, and they are focusing on rule breaking, particularly around allowing American clients to trade on their platform, especially when it's not registered with the CFTC. Going back a little bit, something else I've not put in the notes, obviously, which I wanted to explain this, is in the FinCEN civil monetary notice, they point out something quite important, I think, is that this was, in this case, in this Bitmex's case, it wasn't a case of being naive. They categorically knew that they needed to register, and they had requirements with the US. So in the FinCEN notice, it categorically says that. And this is why they use the word willfully failing to implement certain processes and procedures related to compliance programs. So they knew. There was emails exchanged as well on this. And I would advise people to read that FinCEN notice. It's really good. I think, I can't remember the page numbers, but that's definitely worth a read. So, new area, cryptocurrency. So there might be, a bit of naivety, a bit of uncertainty around, managing programs. But in Bitmex's case, they were well aware of their obligations, and they chose willfully to ignore a lot of them. So after this in 2019, it kind of kicked off a bit more. And then this is what ultimately led to the CFTC and the FinCEN taking action together. Now, you're probably wondering why FinCEN and why CFTC, what's the sort of link? Number one, they were providing securities products through the derivatives, hence the CFTC involvement, which is why they need to be registered with them. And the FinCEN, why FinCEN? Well, because the violations primarily were around three areas related to the Banking Secrecy Act. Number one was a willful failure to manage a compliance program. Number two, again, willful failure to implement a SIP, so a customer identification program. And number three, willful lack of filing SARS as well. So there were the three key findings from the FinCEN notice, and I've just put in there. I'm not going to read all of them out, but just some of the standouts from the FinCEN notice. It just kind of highlights how what's the word? how bad things can get. Let's say, when you're not appreciative of the need to have a robust program in place, or actually even not giving consideration to it from in this case it was willfully. And more recently there's been ongoing case a little bit with some of the individuals, and in the indictment they did say that they were Arthur Hayes was bragging that he chose Seychelles because it's easy to bribe people there, lacks controls. But in the more recent court hearings, the judge kind of dismissed this. He's saying it was a joke. The judge agreed that it was a joke. They were saying it in a jestful manner, and it wasn't actually serious. But that question still needs to be asked: why have they chose Seychelles?
So good. So location, registration, criticism from regulators. That's something that both of the first two companies we're looking at have. So should we go to the next case study next, or should we continue on Bitmex, Dev?
Just a little bit on Bitmex. So
Sure.
yeah, so the failure for having a robust program, what this led to is all sorts of other problems as well. So they exposed themselves to darknet markets, the full force of FinCEN, obviously, allowing US customers to transact. And there were repeated signals that US customers were transacting, and they actually chose to ignore these signals as well. And on one occasion, other organizations, they tried to get services with other virtual asset service providers, and even the other providers were questioning, oh, well, you are actually providing securities services. So they had repeated signals. So it's a case, I keep saying, you can be naive to compliance obligations if you're new, you're new to the field of regulation. But if there's repeated signals, you need to act on those signals. And in this case, it exposed them to other risks as well, where they chose to ignore them. And I say chose, that's not, defamatory. That is what the actual results were from the regulators.
I think that's a really good point, that these are conscious decisions. Some people, including Mr. Zhao of Binance, talk about how new all of this was in 2017. But in fact, in 2013, FinCEN issued its first guidance on cryptocurrency exchanges and said that they would be required to register the same way MSBs were and treated it as money transmitters. That was back in 2013. So it's hard to understand why somebody would say, well, this is all so new that we didn't know, how to do it. And that would be another red flag. If you're going to get into this, into the financial sphere, you'd better understand the regulated side as well as the transactions themselves. So we're going to move to a slightly different type of company. But to do that, we have to understand that a stable coin is a coin that's issued based on, in most cases, but not every case, of fiat currency. Could be other things like gold. I find it fascinating that the author of this definition talked about how fiat currencies are so volatility free. That's not true. They've never been volatility free. You just look at the exchange rates and you can see that. And then there are extreme cases like Argentina, Russia, and other places over the years that where you see extreme devaluations. But that brings us to the third case study. Not clear that Tether is an exchange. It's not advertised as an exchange, but the definition of exchange could, I'm not making a judgment on this, might possibly include an issuer or administrator like Tether. Tether issues a currency called USDT. I'm calling these things SCOs, that's my term, stable coins. That's not the industry term. I don't know that there is an industry term, but I didn't want to repeat the phrase each time. But what's fascinating about Tether, and the reason that I wanted to include it, is that a stable coin is attractive because of its reserves. And then the question is, well, tell me about the reserves. Well, in the Tether case, it's been criticized by numerous news articles, but we don't have to go to the news articles. You can go right to the Tether website and you'll see that its reserves are not audited. They're not verified by a third party. Rather, there is an assurance opinion by an accounting firm in the Cayman Islands that says its opinion is based on information from the company. That's not third-party verification. So then it says, this is the accounting firm's opinion on Tether's website. Now, this has to be translated into English, but it says the realizable value of these assets and liabilities could be materially different if any key custodian or counterparty incurs credit losses or substantial illiquidity. Translation: if Tether invests in other types of instruments as a way of putting its reserves together, of fashioning its reserves, and those other instruments go bad, go south, become illiquid, then anything can happen. But then the reserves overall would be lower. So, or, well, could be much lower. We don't know. We don't know how much of their reserves are in, for example, short-term loans to Chinese companies, commercial paper to Chinese real estate companies. Could that be a good investment? Well, I don't know, maybe. Or could it be illiquid? Could it become, could it fall in value because Chinese real estate is falling in value? I don't know the answer to that either. So again, I'm not suggesting they're an exchange. They're just such an interesting company that we have to talk about who they are in the crypto sphere. Their currency trades every day. I checked it yesterday. It's always around $1. I think the assumption of the buyer, any buyer of Tether, is that they can get their fiat dollar back when they need it. I don't know if that's true or not. Bloomberg has a lot of questions. A major news source has a lot of questions about where all this money is backing, where all the money backing it is being held, and again, enormous growth in a very short time. The proponents, not people who are in the crypto sphere originally, not people who are clearly have the background for all this, just not clear. Is if maybe that's not important to you, that's fine. It's important to me that the person who is selling something have a background in the field. So that's why I always include this slide, and Deb, you can use it if you want, since it's publicly available. The Hindenburg disaster, you can see it coming. That's the point. Deb, I've done a lot of talking. Do you have anything to add?
Just on the stable coins, not necessarily Tether, but just in general, one of the things that I would look for it's the backing. It's what is it pegged to. So those are the kind of questions that I'd be asking. Is you've got this stable coin. What is it backed to? Like, so we've seen with Facebook DM, I think it was called. They said, oh, a basket of what was it, currencies, they said. So in a similar fashion, if I was investigating or assessing the risks with a stable coin, the one thing I'd look for is, okay, so what is it backed by? Is it backed by one commodity or currency? Because, like I said, gold, because then there's a bit of a risk there, concentration risk. If it, it's all pegged on that one other backing, the asset that it's backed against. But if it's a spread across a number of currencies and commodities, let's say, or just commodities or just currencies, what's the split? I sound very pedantic, but those are the kind of small things I'll be looking for. So what's the split? It could be 99 US dollar, but then it could be fractions in GBP, euros, and whatnot. So I'd want to. These are the kind of things that I would be looking at if I'm assessing one of these stable coins as well as its function as well. What purpose is it? What is it serving? Because we've found with Tether, they asked a question about how they say, show me yours. So they said, let's have a look at what you're backed by. Let's see. And that caused a bit of a hoo-ha. I think it was back in last year. I think it was March or April. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was a lot of questions being asked around, you're saying it's pegged 1-to-1. Let's prove it then. And I can't remember what happened, but they did put forward some collateral or something. This is just off the top of my head. It's a long time ago, so I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do remember something about that, where they said, this is what we have got from what I last remember. So yeah, always ask these sorts of questions. I know it sounds very intricate and very nosy, if you will, but if you're interacting and engaging and providing facilities and services, you don't want to get sucked in. Because I think, Ross, you mentioned that good point about the Chinese companies. I think that's quite a good point as well. If all of your risk is pegged on one element. Now we've seen with that Evergrande, sorry. There was a lot of worry about that, saying, oh well, who else is tied to this conglomerate? In a similar fashion, if everything's just tied to one thing, it can cause other risks as well.
Yes, Dev, you've mentioned about 100 issues, all of which are really, really good issues. But one of them I find particularly interesting, which is Facebook. Facebook announced it was going to come out with a stable coin backed by a basket of currencies. So immediately I have a question. Now this is my own question to myself. How are they going to value the stable coin? And if you have more than one currency, then you have fluctuations between and among those currencies. And how's it going to work? Well, evidently it didn't work to the degree that Facebook was happy with it, because they never came out with it. Big announcements, big hiring, testified in the US Congress, really impressive, because when Facebook does anything, the assumption is it's going to be blue chip. End of story. No stable coin. So what does that mean? What conclusion can we draw from it? Not that they did a good or bad job, but that this is a lot trickier than it sounds. That's what I got out of it. This is not easy stuff, stable coins in particular. So yes, Tether's out there. Yes, they're doing all sorts of things. Yes, the coins are being traded. Yes, it's a great way to digitally use the US dollar, but the big question will be whether they can survive all of these questions about their reserves. And I can tell you that reporters all over the world are looking at that particular issue, and there are lots of questions every time an article comes out.
Yeah, people are just putting in the comments that it's practically dead. So yeah, what Khalid said is right. It was kind of just practically just they'd given up on that. I think they sold off bits of it. Yeah.
Yes, but that's the point. That's my point. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's dead, but why is it dead? That's the question we all need to ask about stable coins. Deb, do you want to talk about geographic location?
A little bit, yep. So when you're again assessing these things, you'd want to look. I think we touched upon a little bit about this earlier about where are they based, but you want to look behind the people as well. So, you know, who are the owners? So who's, you know, where are they based? How did they end up there? The CEO, but even employees, we've seen a spread. I think in the case you mentioned it with Binance, spread of employees in a number of locations. We saw that with Bitmex as well. I've not put, a lot of the information I've not put on the slides because there's just so much in these notices. But that was one of the other points. It's in New York, Milwaukee, if I remember correctly, some other locations as well. So always important to look at, like, where are these people located, and is the location well regulated as well. That's not a guarantee of, you know, like we've seen in the UK. UK is a stable location in terms of regulation, but that doesn't guarantee a robust program. So that's something to be careful of as well. Just be careful that the location might be well regulated, but you need to understand whether the firm is actually good in its programs as well. So it might have just been lucky. We've seen that with certain other industries where a whole sector has managed to get itself registered with a reputable regulator, but then investigations have found that that whole sector is a risk. So not necessarily crypto, but that's something to be careful of. Is look at the jurisdiction, but just be careful, even if it is well regulated as well. And also the organizational structure of the financial institution. We've seen with, you've mentioned, well, it mentions here the FBME. We've seen that with a number of financial institutions as well, where their headquarters are in one location, but they're registered somewhere else and they're operating somewhere else. Going back, way back now, a BCCI, Bank of Credit and Commerce International, that bank had that kind of structure as well. And it reminded me of the FBME case, which had a similar structure where it was, BCCI was literally everywhere and nowhere. If anybody wants to look at that case, I would highly recommend BCCI. That I've never seen a bank like that, and I probably never will. But FBME reminded me of that as well, where it's registered in one place, regulated somewhere else, operating somewhere else. And if there's no home regulator, what's going on? How is it, you know, how is it doing business? You know, how has it got to this stage where it's functioning like this? And what's the reason for this unusual setup? That's another thing I'd look for when it comes to location as well. Why have they set themselves up like this? But now this is the second last bullet point. It says jurisdictions of any other entities in the group. With Binance, so they've got different entities in the group, but the UK entity, when the UK regulator asked them about their setup, they said, we're not going to tell you. We're not going to tell you who's behind Binance.com. And we're not going to tell you about the rest of our structure, because that's, in the politest way, they said that's none of your business.
So Dev, we've got 15 minutes to go. Let me just make two comments, because you've covered everything really well. And some of you listening might be thinking, wait a minute, you're asking questions. What the heck's the answer? Well, one of our listeners said, a lot of questions with no answers is very telling. Thank you, Sharon. I would agree with you completely. On FBME, they were started out as a Lebanese bank owned by two Lebanese brothers, then moved to Tanzania in Africa. Now, wait a minute, really? And then essentially closed down by the US for questionable financing. So, geographic location. We're going to start moving faster now, red flags. Now, again, we're going to define them only to make clear. A red flag does not mean somebody's doing something wrong. It means there's a potentially suspicious activity. Potentially suspicious. And we're going to talk about red flags for exchanges, including, since BTMs are exchanges, at least in the US, you have to be careful about them. So, what are some of the red flags? Failure to request meaningful, personally identifiable information, failure to adhere to national requirements, in some cases to take video of the person to establish there's such a person. I believe that's a Canadian requirement. That they advertise anonymity. Gee whiz, if you really want anonymity and you're going to a place that advertises anonymity, here's my unsought and unverifiable legal advice. Do be careful, because that will attract every law enforcement agency on the earth, that sort of advertising. The fact that they're moving jurisdictions, looking for laxer regulatory regimes, Dev has covered that really well. That they're located in a higher risk jurisdiction, that there's an excessive growth of business. Dev, do you want to get this next slide?
Yep. So once we start seeing public statements being made by company officials, again, it's not suspicious in itself, but it might be an indicator that there's trouble afoot. Let's say, and not equally, I've seen before where somebody comes in, big, hire, big exec, and then suddenly they leave. That raises questions. Are they not happy with the management within the organization, or how things are being run, or what's going on here? Again, companies' growth is fueled by celebrities. So, we've seen that a lot with, advertising of crypto, but I've seen some other firms as well. I won't name them, where they've got these big celebrity endorsements and things like that. And then I look at the company and I think, where's your product? I can't really tell. You're in crypto, but what is the actual product doing? So yeah, just little things to be careful of. Individually they might not be a problem, but collectively they might, give you some cause for concern.
And just to add to that, Dev, well said. Binance hired a CEO for its US subsidiary. That was a very well-known person in the crypto sphere, former head of the regulator of national banks, the Office of Control of the Currency. And he lasted, I think it was something like 4 months or 6 months. And then not clear why about his departure, whether it was expectations or something else. Then there's a new crowd at Binance US that seem to be heavily dominated by former Uber executives, the ride sharing company. Well, again, is that a good background? And this is a question. Is that a good background for a financial institution to come from a ride sharing company? I don't have a good answer. We'll see. Yes, these are my grandchildren. Pirates. So then we'll probably, this is close to the end. The stablecoin conundrum is, how do you make money? We've talked about Facebook. We've talked about fluctuations. We've talked about publicly available information. But let's go back to publicly available information, such as any stable coin that releases information on its website. What does it really mean? What is it about? What is it? How can you verify it? How is it verifiable at all? What does the website tell you about its accounting? Is there an audit that's published? Well, these are private companies. They don't have to publish audits. True, but they're advertising that they have sufficient reserves. So then you've got to earn a profit. So how do you do that? And I mean, it's not clear to me. Of course, you're issuing the coins and getting fiat currency. That's 100% profit on everybody who sends you fiat. But what if they want it back? Banks have had this problem for generations, and there have been banking crises because assets and liabilities don't match up. A bank's major asset is its loans, and its major liability is its deposits. So they've got to match those, because if depositors decide they want their money back, and that's what a bank run is, how are they going to get it when loans are not liquid? They can't be liquidated quickly. And then I think the biggest question is, what about central bank digital coins? What effect will that have on the stable coin market? Because when, and this is going to happen, I don't think it's happened yet, The US is studying it. When governments that issue fiat currency come out with their central bank currencies, why would you need a private issuer whose reserves are unknown when you have a public issuer with known reserves and you can use it the same way that you could use a privately issued stablecoin? If we had answers, we'd be probably move to Monaco so that we could spend all our money on high-end real estate. And I still feel bad that when I met a British lawyer from in a deal at the FDIC 30 years ago, and he said that he had moved to Monaco because it was lower taxes. And I said, well, is it true that you live on Avenue Princess Grace in Monaco? He said, yes. I said, is that a good neighborhood? Not funny. So conclusions, Dev?
Yep. So conclusions, just two very broad points we've got here. So as enforcement initiatives strengthen globally, we're going to see some of the more questionable ones, go a little bit underground or trying to move to locations which remain, regulations of less scrutiny. I can't remember the name of the firm, but there was one which was literally hopping around trying to find them. They basically came out and said, look, we believe in the essence of cryptocurrencies, and we don't want to ask KYC questions. They weren't saying we're banking criminals, but it was their core. That's what they believed in. It was their ethos almost. And they said, look, we want to keep things as they are. We're just going to move around. Shifty, or I can't remember what it was, Swift or Shift or something. I can't remember the name or whatever. But they were literally trying to move around to avoid the KYC obligations, because they said if we have to do that, we're going to have to shut down. That was their blunt and simple response, basically. So yeah, we're going to probably see a little bit more tightening of the screws from a regulatory perspective. International standards, FATF, it's put out the last VASP guidance, updated guidance in October 2021. They're looking a bit more now against things like the DeFi space. One area that I would say look out for is the DAOs. That's probably something that's going to gain a lot more attention as well. So yeah, there'll be more focus, I think. So something, if we start thinking about these things now, we can get ahead, whether we're working in a crypto firm or whether banking them, or those sort of virtual asset providers. So I think it's good to think about the risk now, rather than wait for somebody to tell us you need to be worried or this is how you need to do it. So that's why I would say be proactive.
So if you're active in this space, either because you're looking for a job, or you're buying or selling crypto, or you're buying or selling crypto coins for a particular issuer, like that for a stable coin, you really have to conduct due diligence first. Judging by the comments and questions of our audience, very active comments and questions, these are folks who really know the crypto sphere and have asked some very good questions. I'll start with one question. What about having FinCEN or other regulators issue lists of registered businesses that are more trustworthy than others? Short answer, never going to happen. But there are private companies, for example, CipherTrace, that does rate exchanges. They have a red light, yellow light, green light system. Unfortunately, you have to subscribe to get a hold of it. Chainalysis comes out with, which is a competitor of CipherTrace, comes out with similar, well, I shouldn't say similar. They come out with papers from time to time that talk about exchanges generally and cybercrime generally. So there are sources, but I think old-fashioned Googling is going to be the way to go. Dev?
For the UK, so the FCA has got a list of registered and unregistered virtual asset service provider, crypto firms, as they call crypto asset firms, as they say. But maybe I'm just too cautious. I would just say look at the list, see if they're registered or not, but then do your own research as well, whether you're a customer or whether you're a business looking to bank them or do business with them. Just do your own research either way. So because just because they're registered is not a guarantee that they're 100% safe, as we've seen before in the past with the traditional finance world as well. We've seen failings in that space as well. So be cautious. Use the time to look and do your own research.
I want to underline something, Dev, that you said earlier, which is just because a company is in a well-regulated jurisdiction like the UK or US doesn't mean that it's okay. The US certainly has had more than its share of banking failures over the years, and every banking failure, in my view, is a failure of regulation, more than its share of enforcement actions against cryptocurrency firms, again, failure of regulations. And then everyone asks, and you should connect with both of us on LinkedIn. Our email addresses are here. The question you should always ask is, why is this happening? What is the advantage of this firm over other firms? Why would I go with this firm rather than another firm? Why is this firm located in the jurisdiction? All the questions we ask should be part of your due diligence, whether it's jobs, whether it's trading cryptocurrency. I've seen a lot of questions here, also really good comments. The presentation will be available to all of you. Suzanne, let me ask you, let me stop screen sharing and ask you whether you'll be able to send it to people, or should we post it? What would be the best way to do that?
I think we can do both. So we can send after the session, we can send you a copy to all the people who registered. We can distribute that. And Ross, you always share that, through your LinkedIn and the people in the community. So feel free to share that on your LinkedIn and give out the information.
And I'm going to ask Dev to share it on the Laundry because he has a huge following, and to let people know as well that it's available.
Yep.
So we do have lots of questions and comments. IMF issued a primer on stablecoins. Yes, that's true, and that's really helpful. The IMF is a client of mine, and they often do very good work. Crypto ATMs, called BTMs, again, be careful the way you're careful with every exchange. Those are regulated as exchanges in the US and internationally under the FATF recommendations. They're viewed as a regulated exchange. So if it's advertising anonymity, and some BTMs do, then you're going to be in a customer group that is going to be investigated by law enforcement. Suzanne, I'm trying to look through the questions. We've had lots of people posting URLs, which is really good.
Sure. I got a couple of good questions, which I can pose them to you, Ross and Dev. So one of the questions was that would FinCEN or other regulators consider making an easy to access list of registered MSBs that are more trustworthy than these DeFi platforms? Something that plumbers and janitors of the world who are putting money into crypto can see to help protect them from major losses. But I think it's more around consumer protection. So what do you think? Do we have something like that? And what are your thoughts around it?
Well, it's never going to happen because regulators hate to do things like that, to make a qualitative judgment. As Dev said, they will list registered exchanges. That's easy. That doesn't tell you very much. But to say some are better than others, it's just not going to happen. I don't see any regulator doing that. Dev?
No, I don't think so either. They'll tell you this one's registered, this one's not, but they wouldn't. I don't know the legal implications. But just imagine if they said this one's squeaky clean, sign up with these folks. You sign up with them, then you lose all your money, for a hack. Or I don't know. It just opens you up to litigation, I guess, as well. Nobody's going to want to do that.
Yes. Regulators get sued for licensing banks from time to time. There have been some big cases about regulatory approaches. The regulator didn't close the bank fast enough, didn't land on the bank to stop it from engaging in fraudulent activity, insider loans. In the crypto space, it changes every nanosecond. Not going to happen.
Absolutely. Another great question, if I may ask, Silvija is asking, illicit activities made up only 0.15% of all crypto transactions conducted in 2021, according to Chainalysis. Would you agree that this is a misleading statement, as this amount is only the one that is known? What about the actual potential illicit activities that have not been detected yet?
There have been lots of criticisms of the Chainalysis analysis, and I've gotten some of them myself because I sent out an article that I was quoted with had some of my comments that involved the Chainalysis analysis, and immediately got concerns raised by a very active crypto expert who said that their methodology was not complete. I mean, the problem with criminal activity and the problem that regulators, supervisors, law enforcement have had since the beginning of time is, since the stuff is criminal, it's virtually impossible to figure out, to put a number on it. So valid concerns. Whether it's higher or lower, I don't know, because the volume of crypto is so high that the percentage of criminal activity might actually be much lower. I don't think it's certainly higher than fiat, and yet we don't have any good estimates of what the percentage of fiat currency transactions are criminal. Dev?
Yeah, I noted that as well when I first read that, because I think I read that for an article we worked on together. Very quickly, a bit of background on me and Ross. Me and Ross spoke through, I was meant to say this at the beginning. So 3 years ago, when crypto was just kicking off a little bit, end of 2018, 2019, we wrote an article together, AML professionals ready, it's coming and it's not going away. But anyway, back to this. So we've wrote a new article lately on NFTs, and Ross has commented on there again. And so we've come full circle with this 60th edition today. But anyway, back to the question at hand. So yeah, it seems low, but I think they put a caveat in there to say that, this is all we've found from definitely known suspected addresses. So yeah, without that caveat, it can appear a bit misleading. But like Ross has said, we don't even know how much money is being laundered through the regular, the fiat world as well. They're putting these estimates in, but we don't know where all of that money is. And equally here, I think they're just trying to say, look, this is what we've spotted. So it does appear low, but this is what we've spotted. We can't guarantee that there isn't more. It's just that we haven't come across it, I guess. So a very good question, though, yeah, because if you're trying to quantify it, it is down to the methodology of what you've used in quantifying it as well. So
great, thank you so much, Dev and Ross. We're on the top of the hour, and I'm sure many of the questions have not been yet answered, but I'm sure that you guys can reach out to Ross and Dev on LinkedIn and ask them your questions and anything that have not been answered. So thank you.
Suzanne, can I just interrupt you and ask that any really difficult and complicated questions should go to Dev? He's, younger and more energetic than I am. Suzanne?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, thank you. Really appreciate you. Thank you for all the thank you messages on the chat, and congratulations to all the winners. Thank you, Ross and Dev. Please make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn. Follow us on Instagram. We have some backstage videos that we go on the stories. So make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. and hope to see you in 2 weeks. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Suzanne. Great job. Thank you, Dev. Amazing. As
Thank you,
always.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
And don't forget to sign up for the laundry, Dev Odedra's laundry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The shirt and the theme.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you
Thanks.
guys
Thank you,
very
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.